Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations, the official podcast of the Ohio Counseling Association, bringing you updates and conversations from around the state. This episode features a conversation with current President Staci Tessmer. Staci is a licensed professional clinical counselor supervisor who maintains her National Certified Counselor and Board Certified Telemental Health Provider credentials. She has over 10 years of clinical, supervisory, and administrative experience at both the inpatient and outpatient levels of care, working with children, adolescents, and adult populations. In addition to being the current president of the Ohio Counseling Association, she works full-time as the training coordinator for Kent State University's Counseling and Psychological Services. She also serves as adjunct faculty at both Kent State University and Youngstown State University in their clinical mental health counseling programs. Since 2013, she has been an active member and held leadership positions in a variety of counseling organizations. Staci has also presented on numerous counseling topics at local, state, national, and international conferences. So we are very excited to have her join the podcast and continuing our Meet the President series. And as always, I am your host today, Dr. Marisa Cargill, a counselor at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio, and counselor educator at the University of Akron. Thanks for joining and thanks for listening. Well, welcome, Staci. It's so nice to have you.
Yes, thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you on one of our early episodes of the podcast. And, especially since you were there to, have some early conversations about Ohio Counseling Conversations. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, I look forward to it. I've been excited to come on and chit chat with you.
Yeah, so we had a minute to hear your bio there, and we want to really dig into a little bit more about, your connection to Ohio Counseling Association and learn more so that our listeners can learn a little more about getting involved in the Ohio Counseling Association and counselor professional identity. So I really want to kick it off with just some basic questions for you.
Sure.
How long have you been a part of the Ohio Counseling Association?
Well, I think anytime you ask someone how long of anything, it makes them reflect on how old they are, right? So I have been a part of OCA as a member since I was a master's student. So that's been over a decade now, which is exciting and scary that it's been 10 years. And then I have been a part in terms of actually serving with OCA in a variety of different leadership positions, probably 9 years. So it wasn't too long once I became a member that I was roped into some stuff in a good way, of course. But
Awesome. So, this is going to make us also think about that timeline. You said about 10 years for OCA. Uh,
mhm.
is that the same timeline that you've been a counselor as well?
Yeah, yeah.
And tell us your why with that. How did you become a counselor?
I this was not originally the plan. I think so I was an athlete, a student athlete all the way through college, very much into sports, and I always thought I'd be a physical therapist. And so I actually have my undergraduate degree in biomedical humanities and exercise sports science. And I had gotten into physical therapy grad school and did about a year and a half and realized, what am I doing? I was like struggling a little bit academically, which for me was very not the usual. And ironically, I had a professor in that program who was duly licensed in that state as a counselor and a PT. And
Wow.
here I was excelling at all of those more patient bedside manner type
Wow.
classes and spending time with patients, which is the term that they use. Obviously, we don't
Hmm.
use that term in counseling. Asking them, well, why aren't you doing your home exercises? Like, what's going on there? And
Mm.
which those of you who know me know I am very much a planner. And so even my parents were shocked where I was like, I'm dropping out of PT school. I applied to one counseling school, thankfully got in, and the rest is history.
Wow.
It's
The career
very
counselor in me is like, awesome, but
yeah,
she figured it out.
yeah.
That's really interesting to me. This is I don't know what order this will come out in our episodes, but this is our third recording, and
Yeah,
you are the third recording, and the third one. He said this wasn't originally my plan, so
yeah,
very interesting to me as a career counselor.
that is.
Yes, I like it though. Wonderful. So, you know, you had this initial plan. It shifted gears,
Mhm.
and as you got into counseling, it sounds like you got involved in the Ohio Counseling Association pretty quickly. Um,
Yes.
what was the catalyst for that? What initially got you involved?
Well, I had, our program, which I went to Walsh University for my master's degree, and they had kind of embedded that in the conversations anyway in a lot of classes. So I had like heard, okay, OCA kind of tossed around even at the start of the program. But really, I have to thank my advisor and now lifelong mentor. She can't go anywhere. I'm so sorry. Dr. Carrie Van Meter had approached me one day and said, you know what? You are going to be on OASGW's board. And I'm like, what's OASGW? What is OCA? What are you talking about? And so she really kind of tossed me into the mix, and I never felt alone in the process. I know I'm really making it sound like I was thrown to the wolves, but I
Mm.
wasn't. She was very much by my side and supportive of me, as well as many of the other OCA leadership at the time too. And really, it just kind of kick started from there. What I was hooked once I
Mm.
started.
So yeah, one person sort of guided you in, and then
Yeah.
it was a
And I
domino
will
effect.
say I've always, I mean, maybe this is the athlete in me because I've been on teams, right? And so I'm very
Hmm.
much a team oriented person. And I've always been involved in different organizations in like high school and undergrad and things like that. So I think I was already naturally a little bit inclined
Okay,
to want to do that. But again,
sure.
I wouldn't have known anything about OCA or OSGW if it wasn't for her
Mm,
and her seeing something in me that maybe I wasn't seeing at the
okay.
time of like what could I give back.
Sure, sure. So there's power in like having maybe some mentorship or some guidance from those other people play a
Oh
role.
yeah.
Yeah.
I am a diehard for mentorship. I think I would not be where I am today without my mentors.
Okay. So that segues really well into my next question. So what advice would
Mhm.
you give to students or new professionals who are kind of at that same point looking for a way to get involved but not sure how to do it? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, just becoming a member is a great place to start. I think sometimes we are really, how do I want to word it? Like we easily toss these small things, these quote unquote small things, as like, oh, well, what is that going to matter? Or like, what kind of difference is that going to be? Or what's that going to make? And it does. Being a member at least keeps you in the know. Doesn't mean you have to jump on, every opportunity necessarily, but you at least are more aware of the opportunities. Things like following those professional organizations, like OCA, of course, on social media, joining the listserv. But my biggest piece is that buddy system, like that mentorship piece.
Mhm.
I have been so fortunate to work alongside a ton of my peers who were and are still involved in leadership in their journeys. And so it's always nice to say like, okay, is this just me feeling this way? Or like, what do you think about this idea? So it's really nice to have at least a person, if not a group of people that can be really supportive. And again, I guess I'll emphasize the importance that small things can be really meaningful and have a big impact. um, I recently had a conversation with somebody. We were talking about leadership more so at like the university level, which I know you know what that's like, working on
Sure
a
do.
college
Yeah.
campus.
Yes.
And they said something to me that really hit home. And they said, "Don't chase the title, chase the work and the journey." And to me,
Mm.
that couldn't be more true. Which maybe sounds a little hypocritical. Excuse me. I promise I can talk today. A little hypocritical that I'm in this president role and I'm saying that. But for me, I could care less about the title. It's the work and the journey that really fulfills me. And that's what's going to make a more long lasting impact, not just on you, but again, the others around you and the people and the organizations you serve.
Right. So chasing the impact that you leave on people is really the goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
And
that.
something I've really noticed too, or that I've tried to do is, this is all volunteer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if there are certain things, certain strengths of yours as an individual that you think you could bring to the table, like I keep thinking about this podcast and like all of the more like video production type stuff that we're doing, and our lovely Leah, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I know nothing about that, but she brings this cool creative aspect, and that's a part of her and she enjoys it. And I, not
Mm-hmm.
to speak for her, but I could imagine that makes her continue to be motivated to do those things. So
Sure.
you want to find stuff that really speaks to your passions as well, and not just doing
Mm-hmm.
something to do it.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. And the conception of like it can be small and that it's like even that's okay and contributes something to the
Yeah.
larger whole. This makes me, want to put you on the spot. If
Oh
you can
boy.
think of something, um, can you remember a time where you did something small that just turned into something like, whether it was as a student or a new professional, just an example of something small?
Oh, that is a good question. Um, s- I think I can answer that a little bit. So,
Okay.
one of my strengths is organization.
Mhm.
And so, I remember when I was asked to help, like, be on a committee to organize an event. I think it was like a
Mhm.
CE event, almost like a mini conference or something like this. And this was early on in my career, but I'm
Mhm.
very good at organizing and task management and things of that nature. And so, something that felt so natural and normal, and I didn't even think twice to do it. Like, yeah, sure, like give me the schedule. I'll plan everything out, was so helpful for them. Like they made it seem like it was earth shattering. And maybe it was, because maybe that's not a strength of theirs. But it seemed that kind of got the ball rolling. And so next time they had an event, it was like, hey, Staci, like, can you help with the logistical types of things? That was really helpful last time. So that's just one, like, kind of
Yeah.
minute example. But um, yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
I asked that. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Like I
No,
know
it's
that
okay.
wasn't on the questions that we said over.
It's okay.
I love that because I think that that's so tangible. And when we hear questions from like our grad student panels and things like that, that
Mhm, mhm,
um, those are the types of things that they want to like really, digest and can
mhm.
hit the ground running and take away with them. So attend that meeting or,
Yeah.
n- say hi to that person after their presentation and tell them what you liked
Yes.
about it. And I know that that may feel really uncomfortable, but it can make an impression. I know that that's like, I serve on the OCA awards committee, and I think that that came from like attending the All Ohio conference, like as a master's student, and I like networked and said hi to someone like my first time, and I've been on the awards committee ever since. Like, so it's just
Yes.
something that like happened, and so I think those small things can turn into roles
Mhm,
that
totally.
you don't realize. So
Well, and I'm really glad that you brought up your awards committee example, because yes, I do think you got to put yourself out there. I think sometimes as students, I mean, you got a lot on your plate, excuse me, in general, just trying to pass classes and get clinical hours and pass national exams, all that stuff. Um, but don't be afraid to ask a question, or like you said, go up to somebody's presentation that you felt like, man, that knocked my socks off. And I just want to say, like, hi, thank you. This was really relevant. I can't tell you how many times that something further has come from my conversations like that. Not just
Mhm.
me on the receiving end, but now that I'm in
Mhm.
a position where I can help students or other professionals, I love doing that. Like,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you can speak to this too, Marissa. There's no shortage of seats at the table. So if you are looking to get involved, let me tell you, we are gonna help you. Like
Yes.
we're
Always
gonna plug
eager
you
to
in.
have the support, and I always encourage, like, as a counselor educator, I'm really passionate about, like, students getting involved, not because we just want extra help and hands at the table. That's certainly a bonus, but it's also because there's so much learning that happens outside of the classroom. And
Yes.
so I that's what I tell my students. Like, there's stuff that I wish I could teach you that I don't have the hours to teach you in our 2 hours and 45 minutes, each week. I wish that I could. There's special topic stuff that I can't get into in 16 weeks. I wish I could. And so by doing some of these other things, you get exposure to things that you want, number one, and number two, that you'll benefit from having before you're in the field, if you want to get involved before you're out in your internship or even just like in your career. So powerful things that happen by taking those small steps. So when you said small, it just like propelled me to like
Yeah.
make sure we touched on that. I think
Yeah.
it's very powerful.
And if I may add one more thing to what you have been kind of talking about, for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, being a part of an organization like OCA, and I am a part of many counseling organizations by choice, but OCA in particular because it's been such a home for me, especially my leadership journey. The sense of community that I've
Mm,
had over this decade and still have to this day has been a lifesaver for me in the terms of burnout. Like
mhm,
it's just another source of support outside of like, your work and coworkers, your boss, your supervisor, those are great and helpful. But to have just kind of this other third party over here, a group of people that, share a love and a passion for the field, but also like to have fun and do things in a creative way and, you know, help people, foster their leadership. It's just been great.
yeah, I love that. Thank you for indulging me. I
Of
appreciate
course.
it. So, to switch gears a little bit away from, new students, or students and new professionals, I should say, I want to talk about like leadership within the field and your definition of it. What's that look like?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's always the, I think, Oxford general definition, right? Like the action of leading a group or people of like or an organization. But I think it's much more than that, especially when it comes to defining what good leadership is versus bad leadership. And for me, really, what's at the core of leadership is the relationships, or the relationship building. And I personally try to work from a servant leadership lens, and I truly thrive when those around me are thriving. There's a lot of parallels, I think, because I enjoy wearing many hats. Counselor is at the core of my identity, of course, but there's, teacher, supervisor, leader, researcher, right? And all of those, for me, at the end of it, all boil down to thriving when others around me are thriving. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, helping others find their passion and linking them to opportunities that can not only contribute to that passion, but also contribute to the larger picture or the larger mission is, I mean, you can get any better than that. I'm not saying people won't have hard days with that, but, it's really, I guess what it boils down to is really developing and maintaining that space where everyone feels welcome, feels like they can contribute in a positive way, and we're all working together to get those goals and objectives met.
Love that. Yeah. So wrap that with a pretty bow. It's so perfect.
I know.
Like no notes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I like that the ending of that to say like all goals and objectives are met. All are welcome. When we're thinking about that inclusive definition and that goals are being met, like what specifically to this podcast. I know you had a lot of um, contributions to this really getting off the ground, especially early on, and the call out for people being interested in starting this podcast. Uh, what do you see like Ohio Counseling Conversations contributing to OCA's goals for the future?
Yeah, and I will say that it was a collective it was a collective idea, collective initiative for sure. I might have just sent out that call for people, but I'm so appreciative of everyone
Yeah.
that's been working on it, and of course, you and your team's work to keep it afloat. But I really think that as a part of our strategic plan, one of the big things we wanted to look at is like, how can we continue to give back to members? How can we educate our communities? Not just like what is counseling, but special topics. And this is a nice creative way of being, just having a different creative platform to share information, to have conversations, hence the title of just being candid of like, this is what's going on, here's how people are experiencing things. I think something like a podcast makes it seem more tangible and more digestible. A 30-40 minute episode seems reasonable when you're driving to work, right? Versus I have to read this 10-page article that maybe I haven't read, if I haven't been in a master's program in a while, how do I dissect this,
Yeah.
so it's something that makes it, not knocking articles, obviously. Those are
No,
very helpful,
it's
but it's just something that's more manageable and accessible to the
mhm,
everyday
yeah.
clinician, in my opinion,
Yeah.
or
Awesome.
counselor, I should say.
Yeah, digestible for sure.
Mhm.
Awesome. So, switching gears kind of back to the field at large, like what are some challenges that you see facing like or that we as counselors are facing like out in the field right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are always advocating for our clients, right? And advocating for our profession, and there's always going to be someone that's unhappy. I'll just put it that way. And, there's been a lot of movement, not just in Ohio, of course, across the nation. I'm thinking Florida and Texas in particular. When you think about our clients who identify in that LGBTQ plus community, and especially those who identify as transgender, you know, those are clients that we serve. And we're seeing this legislature that's coming through that can threaten our ability to work with that population. And so am so thankful that we have our lobbyists, Amanda and Julia. Like, they are just, my lord, I truly cannot speak highly enough of them, and our government relations committee and
Yeah.
everybody that's involved in like really staying on top of it, because that's a job in itself. Is
Yeah.
just, things happen so fast at that level, and none of us have degrees in
Right.
law or anything. Like, I still sometimes I wonder how the heck I passed American government, because I am just like, what does that term mean? I'm constantly looking
Right.
stuff up. So I think that's a big challenge, is just stuff
Mhm.
from a legislative perspective.
Mhm.
And I also think that um, there are still maybe other disciplines that aren't always happy that we're able to do what we do, in terms of maybe like job competition, if you will. I think that's gotten better over the years, of course, but that's always a threat to our professional identity. And so that's something we constantly are maintaining. Um, and just, making sure that our members feel supported through all of that. That's one of our main goals, with
Mhm.
things like our newsletter and our social media, things like the podcast, because I'm sure we'll have some
Mhm.
conversations on here. It's like,
Yes,
how do we get
definitely.
this information?
Correct.
Because I get information as the president because of my role, but the
Right.
average counselor in, let's say, rural Ohio, if
Hmm.
they're who has the time, first of all, because I know everybody's overworked and underpaid,
Right.
right? And so that's something that's a big challenge is
Yeah.
staying up to date with all these changes that are happening.
And it's hard to, I mean, to your earlier point of like sometimes reading an article is challenging. And so can we disseminate that type of information in other ways to help make it make sense is
Mhm.
really that's sometimes the challenge, getting people to read their emails. Working in higher
Oh, yeah.
education, I feel like that is a challenge we encounter quite a bit. But yeah, even with uh, humans in general, not just students, it can be that information overload that it's hard. Sometimes we forget that even as counselors, we're human. And
Oh my gosh,
sometimes we
yeah.
have to shut it down. And so we're missing some of that critical information that we need in order to advocate, in order to
Mhm.
support the profession. Yeah,
Right, right. And I think that that's one of the things that organizations or being a part of an organization like OCA can help tremendously with because let's say I wasn't in this position, getting those digestible nuggets of info was such a lifesaver for me early on in my career because I didn't have time to go search up this. And sometimes these legislative documents are hundreds of pages long with jargon, again, we don't understand. So it's just a great way of maybe having a little bit more of a streamline in terms of how we get information and how we digest it.
wonderful. Okay. So, on a positive note, we touched on the challenges, but we're counselors, so we always want to look at the strengths based side of things. What are some exciting things that you see, coming up or happening in the field right now too?
Yeah. I mean, we just had a big win for our profession with Medicare reimbursement, which is beyond exciting. It's something we've been fighting for a very long time. And hopefully that's the start of some other changes. Also, the counseling compact. I know it's in the early stages, but we're getting there. And so I think just from a client care perspective, that could be really helpful. Just, getting more people access to care.
Mhm.
Um, and also, and this definitely is weighing on my mind today because as training coordinator, I work a lot with establishing and maintaining our counseling internships and working on getting those paid. Counseling and our friends in the social work field don't always get paid internships, and I know there's been a really big shift towards that, especially with the passing of um, the governor signing off on, I think it was like the 85 million dollar budget approval for supporting the behavioral health care fields, specifically putting money aside for internships. And so, again, that's at the beginning stages, but it's just exciting to see that we're being recognized and hopefully supporting the growth of our field. I know a lot of the master's programs in particular in Ohio are booming, which is great. I don't think anyone's short on admissions to my knowledge because to me, that says something if people are wanting to come into our field and hopefully
Mhm.
stay in our field.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So, similarly, curious, like, are there folks that you admire in this field?
Oh man, I had so many. Like like I said, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Dr. Carrie Van Meter for seeing something in me and you know baptisming, is that a word, by fire, just here you go, I know you can do it and you're gonna do it kind of thing in a positive way. But I'm so thankful to past and present OCA leadership. I mean, I have learned things from my students that I teach, from supervisees that I've worked with, and I think that goes back to kind of forget the title. It's not always about the people in the power positions that make an impact. Um, I really learn from the people that I surround myself. But like I said, the mentorship piece has been huge for me. Um, I would say another mentor of mine is probably Dr. Jake Protivnak. I got paired with him years ago as an emerging leader through OCA, actually, and he hasn't gotten rid of me since. So sorry, Dr. P. Doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon either. Trying to think who else. Obviously, my doctoral program faculty and advisors. I would not be here today without them, the Kent folks. But I know that sounds weird to say like, oh, everyone, but I really do try to take away something from
Well,
everyone I interact with.
so what I hear you say is, though, it's important to build yourself a community.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think that's a great takeaway, um, for anyone listening, no matter what stage of your career you're in, that having a community can be really an important part of the equation to feel um, supported and comfortable um,
Yeah.
in this stage, no matter what stage you're in, because you kept them around, no matter what part
Yeah, I have.
of your career you were in early, or middle or later on. So that's important, and uh, we need to remember that we don't have to do it alone.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
that's
I
powerful.
think that's, like I said, just in terms of burnout and career longevity, I think it's so important to have that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So this last question, I there's one more, and I don't think I shared this one with you, but it's an important
That's
one.
go
Okay.
for it.
So the name of the podcast is Ohio Counseling Conversations. And we're curious to know, like, what important conversations you believe counselors in Ohio, or just counselors in general, should be having with each other, um, and or with their clients.
Oh, man, that's a good question. I'm sure that my immediate thought, and I'll be honest, was with what time? And I'm thinking of our full-time counseling folks who work in the field. Not
Hmm.
saying that our counselor educator friends or researcher friends don't experience this either, but I'm thinking about the people who are truly on the front lines, seeing most of the clients, things of that nature. I want to know, how are you taking care of yourself? Are you taking care of yourself? What can OCA do to maybe try to help
I love
support
it.
that?
Yeah.
I know that was a big initiative to try to develop this private practice division of OCA, which I know is again more initial stages. But I see you.
Mm,
I shouldn't say I. It's again very collective. OCA sees you, and we hear you, and I think that more attention needs to be given about the counselor as a whole person.
mhm,
Um, I mean, we all need to stay on top of our skills and do things ethically and, get our CEs and 100%. But I think that there's more conversations to be had on
mm,
how do I not just survive, but thrive
mhm.
as a counselor in the 20, what are we in the 21st century still?
Just say in 2023, you're good.
Okay, 2020.
That's I love that immediate reaction. I'm glad that I didn't give this question to you out of time. We added that one when we interviewed Dr. Dohi, and so wanted to make sure that we included it when we spoke with you. That's fantastic. And I think it goes back to that conversation of we're human too. We're counselors and we're human. And it's really important that if it's something that we are educating our clients to do for themselves, we must also do and walk that walk, model that same, you know, behavior. So,
And I think that also goes, when you said that, I also thought about, yes, modeling self care. And then how do we exhibit self-care self, but also advocacy, right? Like that's a big part of our jobs is to help advocate for our clients, but how are you advocating for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
In your place of employment, um, your identity as a counselor, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
can look many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love all of that. Like I think of like examples when I taught a class last night and so my students were telling me about a situation where they were advocating for themselves and I was like, I love that. But like when they were talking about it, it was like one of those situations where they're like, oh, should we be talking about this in front of the teacher? Like that they thought that they were in trouble for saying something in front of me. I said, I think it's great that you guys advocated for yourself. Like, well done. Like you're doing what you're supposed to. This is good practice for you. Like I'm proud of you. You're not in trouble. But
Yeah.
that was like a positive situation. So
Well, and I think
um,
and I'm like you, I really try to emulate that atmosphere in the classes that I teach as well. But I do think we're often um, giving grace to students to have those conversations of like, oh my gosh, I messed up or I'm stressed out. But we do not give ourselves grace or maybe our colleagues grace who've been in the field a long time, who maybe, are having a day where it feels like an imposter syndrome type of thing. That doesn't necessarily go away when you get all the letters behind your name, right?
mhm,
So
right.
I think it's giving yourself grace to be human and to do
Hmm.
what you need to do. Because at the end of the day, um, it's your clients who are going to suffer. I mean, you'll
Hmm.
suffer too, but like we
Right.
want to think about from a counselor lens. It's the clients that they need us to try to be at least a stable version, right, of
Right.
ourselves.
Well, and if we can't give ourselves compassion,
Mhm.
how stuck are we really going to be in extending that kind of grace and compassion to anyone else? So,
Right. Mhm.
so that modeling becomes very important in that equation. So wonderful. Well, Staci, this has been such a great conversation, and we're so grateful for your service as president and for joining us today here on the podcast. Any final
Anytime.
thoughts you'd like to share?
I just think, for those of you who are maybe listening and have been considering or maybe hesitant to becoming involved in counseling leadership, to just reach out. That's all it needs to start out with is a conversation, right? No one's saying you have to take on this role that is maybe more of a time commitment than you're able to do. Maybe it's just volunteering at a conference. It can be small things, but you have to start with reaching out. And so if you feel more comfortable reaching out to current leadership, including myself, if you feel like I just want to show up to a meeting, like a meet and greet that everyone's welcome to, there's places there are places where you can feasibly kind of step in to have those conversations. I'm just encouraging you to take them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, we've loved having you here on the podcast, and we hope that you will continue, all of you, continue listening and join us again. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you can stay up to date with Ohio Counseling Conversations online and wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're a counselor in Ohio and would like to get involved as a part of production or as a guest, or know someone who might be interested, you can email us at ohiocounselingconversations@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Counseling Association's Media, Public Relations, and Membership Committee and its podcast subcommittee. This episode was executive produced by Hayle Fisher and Marisa Cargill. Research and fact-checking by Kailey Bradley. Editing by Leah Wood. Original music by Elijah Satoru Wood. Special thanks to Staci Tessmer, Shardine Simpson, Dohi Kimopal, Alma Moore, Amy Barcelo, and Chase Morgan Swaney. views, beliefs, or references mentioned in this episode do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Ohio Counseling Association. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect the view of the Ohio Counseling Association or any of its officials. Thank you.